I just want to talk about content security policies, because this is something that you can put onto your WordPress site pretty quickly to gain in search engine ranking. And there's ways you can just use plugins to do it. And then I'm going to talk about why those plugins suck and what it really means in order to actually do this correctly. Because the reason you put a content security policy on your website, I'm going to flip over to like shared screen view, and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. But is anybody familiar with content security policies? Have you put them up on anything? Do you know what they are? Anyone out there? Nope. Okay, so a content security policy is something that preloads before your website loads inside the .htaccess file, where it's declaring all the headers that are going to respond back on the response that's been requested, right? In a server, you have a request and then you have a response. And oftentimes your browser, it's like consolidating like multiple requests in a single request towards a server, and you have a response coming back to you. Well, you have a file on your machine that kind of configures what that response is and kind of tells how your website interacts with the machine underneath it. That file is called your htaccess file. It's .htaccess. And inside of there, it just keeps information about your website. And it's really technical information about what the header should be like, whether I should be permissible for this website to be iframed by another website, which you really don't want, right? Because there's lots of ways you can hack a website if you iframe a website, and all sorts of injection and bend all the business logic inside of it once you're able to contain it like that. So you need to hold your website like way back into a place of protection. You guys have heard of firewalls. You've heard of firewall rules. Well, a content security policy is an allow list of firewall rules for files and scripts that are allowed to execute on your website. So you basically, if you don't do anything, your servers have declared what the allow list is. And they usually have these more broad ones that are going to be larger. Especially if you're using WordPress, they're going to have cheaper hosting. They're going to be really broad. And a lot of times it's okay. You know, you don't have to have this thing, blah, blah, blah. We're going to set you up or protect you, or we have a backup of you in a different direction. But in order to keep your site from actually getting hacked, you actually want to create rules for what files can actually execute. And why would you want to do this? Well, in the future, in 2025, we have mandatory pen testing across all of our supply chains, industrial-wise. So we're going to see our clients coming up, especially medical, technical, they're going to have mandatory supply chain, penetration testing, vulnerability testing. And part of this is having a CSP on your website. So when you have the CSP on your website, you'll be able to pass these tests. So in the future, you're going to have clients, they're going to come to you and ask you, did you check the CSP on my website if they're in protected industries? Our protected industries are medical, water, electrical, utilities, that kind of stuff. So these are the types of clients that are going to have it. Of course, all of aerospace and defense. And they're going to be like, do you have a content security policy? Well, if you have WordPress and a content security policy, you can go ahead and turn on this thing. And what you're going to do is you're going to flip it over, and I could probably show you guys, demonstrate it, but it's just you're going to just write out this little thing that says unsafe inline right there, which allows for all the normal scripts to execute inside of all your other scripts, and everything's going to be okay. And then Google's going to be like, well, you did do this content security policy, so I'm going to give you your little gold star over there. And we all know that Google rankings are based on your gold stars and the number of links you have pointing in. So as you pass your accessibility tests, as you pass your security test, this is a security test, you get extra gold stars in Google. There's the basic reason why you want to do it, because Google is the lord of information inside of our internet. So we have a content, I like how you guys are joking there. That's fun, Jeremy. So we have a content security policy. We write them. Are they complex? Not really. Is it kind of technical? It's not as bad as code. Is it tricky? Yes, it is. It's kind of like a logic puzzle. It's definitely like a firewall rule. For those of us that are older, such as Rick McHugh and me, like we're gonna be like, yeah, we know about firewall rules. We've been around forever. I've had to write firewall rules. For those of you that haven't had to write firewall rules ever, it's gonna feel kind of weird. You haven't written firewall rules before. It's kind of funny. But let me kind of get it forward. You guys can maybe ask some questions, talk among yourselves. I need like 60 seconds to kind of assemble the next phase of the presentation, and then we'll move forward. Questions, comments?
It's good so far.
Yeah,
excited for the next phase.
Gold stars are good.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna get sharing here.
A quick question while you're getting that loaded up. So you mentioned this was a WordPress specific, but I would assume that this is just like a generalized thing you would want to include on websites, having a content security policy.
True. You would want to do this on all different types of platforms. Get your content security policy straight. On advanced platforms, React and above, that kind of stuff, application-grade platforms, they have methods inside of there. You have your own functions still to handle your content security policy. There's automated lists and rules. Everything in the future is going to have it. Who gets bastardized? WordPress. Why does WordPress get bastardized? Because on the inside of WordPress is a variety of different types of scripts and styles. And they're written in all these different ways from all these people all around the world. And they're not following the most modern format of how to declare your script, how to declare your style. And people are just writing scripts and styles inline. Well, inline scripts and styles, while they work, they were declared bad like 8 years ago, 10 years ago. No more inline styles and scripts. Everybody use style sheets. Everybody use classes. Stop styling inside. Don't do it anymore. It's bad, right? Same thing with anyway, other types of, if you open up a JavaScript, make sure it's declared properly, make sure the type is declared properly, that kind of stuff. Don't just open script and then just start tagging. These are all things that have become modern that every modern programmer knows, but those of us that came from the backward days, we were like, well, we learned in JavaScript 1.0 or whatever it was, like ECMA script version 4, like, you know, whatever the early days are. Rick laughing over there. So I know you feel the understanding of having to progress your coding skills across the years as everything is becoming increasingly more object-oriented and extracted from features. So here we go. Screen share. Let's see here. We're going to go here. I'm just going to use one Chrome tab. Here we go. Content security policies, right? So this is how you use to mitigate your XSS attacks. And if you do get someone that comes to you after they've done a vulnerability thing, or if you have an important client that has higher traffic, they're going to want these things on it because it's just a way. And every website in the future, I'm sure Flutterflow probably puts a basic one on top of it. They're all going to have this. So you basically just write this really simple thing. You can do it inside the page itself as a meta right here. And I'll make my screen larger for those of you. Or you can actually write it inside the htaccess file, depending on what you need to do. So inside the htaccess file, it just is this. You just declare a content security policy. It's just like default source self. I allow everything coming from me to be allowed, right? Everything coming from me to be allowed. And I allow this website over here. I allow this, and I allow this. I allow images from everywhere. This means images. I allow media from Vimeo. I allow script source from my JavaScript library.com, jQuery, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to go through and you're going to declare these various aspects. Now, this seems tricky. Does WordPress have a tool for this? You bet it does. It totally has a tool for it. So if you're in the back of a website and you are over here, you can put a plugin on your website like HTTP headers. Can you see my screen? No, you can't see this tab. Oh, gosh. This is tricky. Hold on a second. I need to share something different. All right. Now you can see my entire screen. So there's this plugin right here, and you can go in here and be like, okay, I want this stuff turned on. And these are all different ways you can protect your website. These are different headers, and you're going to learn that like these first 4 or 5 are very important, or 6. Some of these are okay and less important. Only one of this one is important, which is this one right here. It just needs to be declared. You don't know this because you've never had tried to do this before, but this is one way to do it. You can turn it on and it's like, what do you want to do? And then it'll be like, okay, turn it on. You can do same origin, or you can do it. And this is like how you can frame something, right? So all these things can be declared. You're like, wait, is there an easier way to do this? Not really for the headers. The headers themselves, you have to like turn on and off and declare whether you want the same origin, whether you want cross origin, which means you're sharing between certain websites, and you're going to list out the websites that you share with. So this is a content security policy. Why would I want to do this? Well, let's just say I'm able to inject something in somebody important like aerospace company or that type of website, one of the higher priced medical device companies. You could do something pretty malicious towards someone with the types of injection and robbing the data, getting them to click on things that are not really them, force logging them behind the background into Amazon or into any of their bank account or whatever it is. You can do these things because you have control over the website, because you don't have control over the scripts. So that's what exists back there. Those are the kind of dangers that there are. And then I'm going to go for why it was so hard in WordPress, because it was so hard. I've written 4 of these now for WordPress, and the first 3 you just write these little hashes together, and so you're there and you like have this initial like way of writing the hashes, and so you're there like declaring your objects out that you need to be safe, and then hashes is how you need to declare your hashes, and then these are the like locations, and the hashes represent every script that's loading into a WordPress website. But the challenge is there's ways to like fall into infinite hashes loops, and you never really know how many hashes you actually need. I actually paid someone to continue getting hashes for me because I didn't understand how to solve it. So because I didn't understand how to solve it, like this is a very complex site that we're looking at, by the way. This site gets, 4,000 or 5,000 visits a week right now. And yeah, there's a lot of pieces, but there's not this many hashes. I ran into an infinite hashes problem where the guy just kept getting hashes, not really understanding that there's a way around the hashes. And so I just unless you choose to publicly label your WordPress as vulnerable, CSPs for WordPress are much harder than you think. All right, so I made it sound like it's easy. It is easy, but when you're putting unsafe inline up there, is that you're really actually saying, I allow injection on my web page. It is something that I'm okay with. I have it open. And sure, you're declaring what your security policies are, but most people have no clue what they're declaring inside of here. So if you do have to go with unsafe inline, which is basically the only way that you're going to be able to get a more advanced WordPress site through this process, unless you start to code. And I'm going to go right there. Like, this is really wrong. Like, you shouldn't really use unsafe inline, especially if your job is, like my job was, to protect the website. Like, someone came to me with a contract and said, I need to pass this thing because I work with security defense contractors, and I'm a secondary, vendor. So they're doing a supply chain vendor tracking. And so if you do want to work with these vendor people, this is something to know. So the purpose is like building a firewall, but there's an HSTS plugin, but this thing pissed me off. I'm not even going to show it to you. It was really annoying to deal with. You go to all the blogs and you type in like CSP for WordPress. Nobody knows how to write one of these things. Like, it's just like, you should do it with hashes. And you end up in these problem areas where you're like writing infinite hashes. And that's not how you need to write it. So here's how you do it. I'm going to show it to you real fast. I'm going to ask you to be gentle with my code because I wrote this just a couple days ago. But here it is. So here's how I finished it. This is all the hashes I needed to declare. And these are just these 7 or 8 right here. I just had to declare these, maybe 9. These hashes in here. These are all the objects that I had to, or all the resources I had to declare. And then I had to nonce everything. Now, what is a nonce? Nonce boy? I don't know. So what is a nonce? A nonce is going to be a script that goes inside of it that's declaring a custom random number as the file is leaving the server. So as the file is leaving the server on the response, right, you have the ability to stop the output, right? If you've gone through computer science, or if you're fairly aware of this stuff, you have an input, you have your program, your processes, and you have your output. And you can stop and manage your data that's going through your process by using certain types of functions of that language. So in order to handle this, I had to build a nonce, right? So here's a nonce. Well, actually, that's not a nonce. here's a nonce right here. So I had to generate a nonce. And in order to generate a nonce, we just use this simple thing. Now, did I figure this out myself? No, I looked it up. Like, I did not know how to generate a nonce. I was not like, oh yeah, we're going to bin to hex and we're going to random bytes. They're like, no, didn't know this. I was just like, how do I do this? And like, I learned. But my problem was infinite hashes. And in order to get rid of infinite hashes, you need to nonce things and then declare your objects as a nonce. And anything that's been nonced can be declared as safe. So you're basically saying, I give you provenance. I give you provenance. Hey, wait a second, you're not wearing a visitor badge. I give you provenance. I give you provenance. See all these people right here? This is all my files that are supposed to come from me. Now, when I originally wrote this, I took the code out here. When I originally wrote it in WordPress code to make it work in WordPress. And it didn't work. Like it worked for everything in WordPress, but and the theme itself, it did everything for the theme, but it would not go past WordPress to handle the plugins. So in order to handle the plugins, what I had to do was to basically create a session to handle the user. And then dynamically, when the user makes the request, I'm like, here's your session and here's your nonce. So as soon as they come in, we're creating a session and a nonce for these individuals. And then when as soon as the page finishes processing, then I start output buffering. And my output buffering was to actually fix the code of all the plugins that had bad code in it to move it all up into modern code styles. So I had to fix the code for like 25 different plugins. So in order to do that, what we had to do there is actually, so we have our nonce, right? The nonce is coming through. We have our internal styles. And then we start having to use regex right here in order to handle the output buffering. And I'm ripping out all the script tags and I'm making sure that all the script tags have nonces on them. But first what I did was convert all the inline styles into a style sheet. So down here in the inline styles, I had to sit down here, pull out anything that said style as an inline style, rip it out, give it a class value, put it into a number, and then put it back as a value into it with the existing values of whatever was in there, now moved into the head as like class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, class 5. And then inside the head of the file, I'm able to open up the classes and be able to read what is happening on the page. So, okay, there's one weird file right here. So inside the elements, inside the head of the page, down at the bottom of the head of the page, I opened up a style, and that's what I built right there. Was just ripping out all the classes from everybody that had inline styles anywhere, and then assembled it into a class structure, and then just put it there, and then labeled every single file as it. And then for every JavaScript and stuff like that, that gets declared inside of here, there's a ton of stuff that is just nonced. So this thing is just nonced, and this thing is nonced. And so you get the idea that everything now has a nonce attached to it, which is a value. All right, I'm going to stop for a second, and we're pretty far into the technical. And as I weave my way out, I'm going to open it up for you guys. Have any questions relevant to this area right here? Where are you? I lost you. Where is the file?
So I'll say
There you
were showing the contents or the CSP for images, for example. Would you also do it for things loaded from a CDN? I'll say like your Bootstrap. You loaded that from a CDN, so you'd have to include that particular CDN into your content policy?
Yes, there's two ways to handle that. You would have both what's called a CDN. So I'd nonce it just so I knew that in that request, these are the files that I was permitting. So your nonce is for that particular purpose. In this request, these are the files that I'm permitting. So nobody injects anything that's not supposed to be there along the process coming back, which is easier than you think. The second part of it is actually called script integrity. And you can actually pull a hash from an existing script that exists up there. So it's on a CDN, and then you write down the hash of your script integrity and you paste it into your thing. And so you actually can keep a little sheet, or however you want to handle it, of what's script integrity, or you can even write it in there, and it's called integrity. And then it just has a hash of that file. And that hash is basically a mathematical computation moved to 32 digits, which represent the actual bit size of that file. So you know that no one has changed it during transport.
Right. But if you have the SHA hash, then let's see, do you need the nonce for your CSP?
If you have the SHA hash, do you need the nonce? The nonce is for the request. And so everything coming back, the SHA hash, you can use for your local files also. And that's the initial way of handling a CSP. What I showed you guys is I had to use a nonce because dynamically created and dynamically generated style sheets and JavaScripts and stuff like that change on every page load. And because of that, the hash is not the same. And so you have perpetually new hashes. It only works for remote resource requests. So SHA hashes work for remote resource requests or things that are non-changing. In every other situation, you have to use a nonce. Now, is that going to work for me? How am I going to write what you wrote? Well, that's the whole point, guys. It's like I wrote it. So in the future, you guys can cut and paste that into your functions.php file and be like, look, he wrote, 100 lines of code that work. And it basically rewrites all your code for you on the way out the process and just changes out the scripts and the nonce and the hashes so all your plugins pass compliance. And that's all I was doing, is changing the code value using DOM manipulation, using regex. So all the code that because you use plugins from everywhere, will actually pass compliance. Yeah, that's it. I got super excited because I couldn't find this written anywhere. I found one company that provides this service for $2,000 a year. So like, for $2,000 a year, we'll do it for you. And I was like, interesting offer. But no one actually had this code written down. And so someone had contracted me to do it. And the first time I wrote it, I did it just with the hashes and I handed it back to him. I'm like, I don't think this is right. He's like, you want more time on it? I'm like, yeah. So I upped the contract and I went back at it again. I reapproached it a second time. And that time I was like, had a greater idea of what's going on. Now, having script integrity for the objects in transport, I did not write that code out, right? That would be a separate feature. That would be another add-on to this code by putting that integrity out there. There's actually a location where you can get the actual hash for that particular file, like with like jQuery or something really common. And then you can just move it forward and use it. And that would be a whole secondary part of this function, which I have not written. I just wrote this part, which was fix all the code inside inside it, so it'll actually pass a CSP. So that's it. There's the presentation. I think, I have, this is my first time telling anybody about it, but it made me happy when I wrote it because I realized that no one had done it right. I looked around and looked around and looked around for WordPress for a long time. And I'm like, geez, everybody's just doing unsafe inline. That's the decision. You have WordPress, you're just going unsafe inline because no one had figured it out how to actually handle the fact that your code is coming from 50 different sources or whatever it is. So there it goes. I wrote like a mini linter for WordPress. And the CSP itself, it's important. Even if you do unsafe inline, it will give you a little gold star. That might be the only way through it. If you have a very small site, it's super easy. At the end of the day, if you're doing search engine rankings, you're just trying to get gold stars. I did it for this. I did it for this. I did it for that. But if you want to talk with me further about the code and dig into it because you like code, let me know. And that's the end of my presentation.
That was appreciate it. That's really cool. One question I have is plugin updates. So do you have to rewrite this every time you update your plugins?
No, of course not. No, yeah. What I did is can you still see my screen? No. Okay. So yeah. So the whole point of this is like this code runs at runtime. This code runs on the way out of the server. And this code ruins your caching. Okay. So those are all factors of it. If you're going to go for high security provenance of your files, it'll ruin your validation. But in order to get a strict dynamic, which is what a good CSP should have, which is strict dynamic on the strict source, you have to be able to figure this out, how to actually nonce your content going through. And if you want to get strict dynamic on your things, and this is the only way to really stop an injection. It's not the only way, it's the leading way to stop an injection. Before you get WordFence or all these other things, WordFence is great too. WordFence does stop injections. WordFence does it a different way. WordFence is great. I've had it stop injections for me. But WordFence doesn't give you this little star. This is a star that's responsible for getting it on there. And yeah, I mean, this code itself, oh, there's another piece of it, which I forgot to tell you about, but I had to write a jQuery CSP fix right here because I had to fix jQuery because jQuery was primitive in the way that it was calling JavaScript. So that happened. That's real. And in order to get that into the functions.php file, right, I had to just enqueue it in the front of the HTML. And then that basically processes server side on the way out after the PHP processes server side on the buffer. Then this runs on the buffer and just fixes jQuery so it runs properly. Because it's JavaScript. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't know how to fix this. This one was an assistant help of good old ChatGPT.
I couldn't see well. Is this so you're doing this in the functions file?
Yeah, I did all that code in the functions file. Everything ran in functions. That's where it should run. This type of stuff that you're building should always never be inside of a plugin, or obviously always should you have your child themes ready. You know, we haven't really talked about basic WordPress or that kind of stuff, but I figure a lot of you are web developers. That's kind of stuff is in the beginner part of it. Like, you should read your general frameworks, and if you have questions, I'll answer them. But yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the questions. How to solve a puzzle like that? That was the fourth time I've done that, right? It was the fourth time I've written a CSP for somebody. Had different various defense contractor clients that have a client that can't solve it. They come to me like, hey, how do I solve this? I'm like, well, hold on a second. Yeah. Like, and so the first times I did hashes, like I said. And why is security important? In the future, everything's provenance. What is Web 3.0? Provenance. What is all these other pieces? It's all about, does the data have a validator along with it? And that's why I think it's important for everybody to really know what the difference is in something. What makes art valuable? Provenance. What makes data valuable? It's just these things. And we live in this world of duplication, but eventually our job is, besides making beautiful things, is it's going to be to make sure that things are protected, things are safe, our websites are not hurting people. And you guys should know that WordPress itself is a high value target. And there are trained teams across the world that will use it as a reflector target, right? So your WordPress might already be in trouble. So when you pick a platform like WordPress, because it's such a large target, you should know that you have hundreds of programmers around the world that are actively targeting your platform. And that when you hand that to your client, you're handing them something that has a target on it. Whether or not they know it, whether or not you know it, it is already in existence that there are hundreds of programmers actively targeting and building malicious pieces to use WordPress for future war, for future targets, for malicious things, or just to sell Viagra. It already exists out there. It doesn't matter. The other platforms don't have that kind of target. If you continue to choose WordPress, this is your target. Now, I choose WordPress. Obviously, I was inside of WordPress. I just built another website for myself out of WordPress. Well, how do you protect it? I just told you. A CSP is one of the ways to protect it. But it's mandatory that WordPress has this if you're going to stay on WordPress in the long run, because you're going to get hacked if you're not already hacked. Microsoft has a statement which is assume breach, right? I study a lot of security, so I go through all this stuff all the time. You assume breach and then you deal with it protectively. So if you're already breached, how do you keep your website from hurting people? Well, you only allow the things you want to allow inside of it. So if it is already breached, the file's already on your server. If this already exists, it can't be used inside of your realm. It could still be used, but it may not be able to be used inside of your realm. So being responsible when you're on a platform like WordPress for all the files, if they do hold you responsible to it, is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than you might think. You know, it's okay that your dog walker or your masseuse or whatever, they might have a nice website. You have a beautiful multi-million-dollar platform in WordPress. But you are a target. It's like it's like knowing that your airbag is going to go off or it's dangerous or something like that. WordPress isn't recalling it. They've fixed the core. It's not the core. It's the plugins. It's the jQuery. It's all these other pieces that are actually vulnerable and repeatedly vulnerable. And so, yeah, my recommendation, good question. I would venture to get off of WordPress because of the high target that it is, because it's a targeted object. I mean, if you know they're dropping bombs, you go to Sarajevo, right? Do you actually pick your vacation there? Do you pick to put up your business there? Do you pick to go this way? Like that right there is a big question. Maybe you do. You're like, I'm going to Sarajevo and they're bombs. I'm going to the Middle East and they're bombs. Like maybe you do, but you're going with the determination of like, hey, you can go to Flutterflow, there's no bombs. Flutterflow is safe. Flutterflow is protected. Flutterflow will take you on all the platforms with perfect mobile, perfect app development like Flutterflow. Who knows? I didn't even know Flutterflow existed. I went and looked at it. I'm like, oh God, they're using Flutter and they built a tool like this. Like, you know, you have these types of capabilities. I have Webflow. Is Webflow good? Webflow is strong. Webflow is super strong on the inside. I know people that program Webflow. Webflow is ultra strong. WordPress is great. I loved WordPress. It taught me so much. I had so much pain that it brought me across the years from building hundreds of websites.
Just, hey, I'll mention one thing though. You look at the two big hacks that are ongoing. One is United Health, that is basically it's kind of a private SaaS for healthcare vendors. These vendors have been, you know, these services have been down for months. They're still trying to determine what the extent of that hack is from what is essentially like a proprietary SaaS system. The other one that just happened is CDK Global. You know, that's an auto dealers, basically a SaaS application for auto dealers. And, you know, they're doing ransom on the tenants of that SaaS system. So you're right. It's true that, and you know, they're slowly coming up. Some of them are paying a ransom. Some of them are doing without. So you're right. WordPress is you know, like I say, 43% of the web is powered by WordPress. So yeah, obviously that's a big target. But then the SaaS systems, you know, basically you get a high volume of ransom on those if you can target those. So I don't know if it's safe anywhere, I guess is what I'm getting at. I don't know if SaaS systems are, yeah, right now, I mean, maybe Shopify is okay. And, you know, Webflow is okay. But, you know, I'm pretty sure those are I don't know what people would attack. Yeah, Webflow could be under attack also. So, you know, just depends. I don't think it's safe anywhere.
I hear your hypothetical, and my response to it is it has to do with the scope of the company that it's building the work.
CDK Global is not hypothetical. Check the news. It's happening right now. I mean, people are you know, they're selling cars with pencil and paper for the last week. So I'm just saying.
I'm saying it has to do with the scope of the application or the quality of the application that it's being built. Like Shopify is $1 billion application, right? Webflow is a $500 million application. The scope of that application is so strong when you're talking about something. WordPress is a free application, and the core of WordPress is ultra strong and ultra secure. It's not the core. It's actually how we're using it, which makes it so vulnerable. It's because of all the other developers that have built all these other tool sets that have all this code that exists, and everybody's learned to love that freedom and flexibility, yet no one has learned to really lock it down. And so locking it down is important if you don't want your website hurting other people. Yeah, it's just a little dog walker site, right? But it's actually used to scam like vulnerable populations of Midwesterners or something like that. Like, you get the idea. Like, it's not the fact that your application's hurting something, it's the fact that it's on WordPress with a bunch of other plugins that make it a giant server tool. Let's tell a story. I got a chance to sit with one of the writers of Mozilla when he wrote Mozilla from the original Netscape version of it. And he said that's when we were moving over to Rust from C++. And he's like, in C++, we had 575 like security errors. He's like, we moved over to Rust, we got over to 40, we worked on those, and we got them down to 0 in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. As soon as we moved to Rust, we got rid of all the languages. He's like, it wasn't the fact that the vulnerability was not Netscape or Mozilla. The vulnerability was C++. C++ is one of the worst languages to code in for the vulnerability factors of it, and you shouldn't actually use it anymore. It's not a usable language. Java itself has progressed, but all these previous versions of Java are shitty. And how many applications are written on previous versions of Java? Maybe a dealership application. That seems like something I would write. And it's not that the language itself is bad. It's that literally it was so complex and it was so vulnerable due to the complexity that existed inside of the structures. We're breaking back to simple high-powered languages that are built to security. And that's where we're seeing the evolution.
Yeah, Rick had to take off, but yeah, I think it was a really good. I appreciate taking the time and presenting that, and it was very, very useful. Where can we get additional information? Is there a resource that you can provide that will help people if they want to get more info?
You know, I'm going to write up more blog stuff at my blog here about it. And
Okay.
I also own webdevs.net. Haven't actually used that one recently, but yeah, I'm going to write some stuff up at it, just kind of figure out where this idea goes. But presenting it to some web developers who kind of understand what it is that I built, because no one's built it yet. If you look around, it just says like CSP for WordPress, do it this way, just do unsafe inline. And I don't think people really know. I think either people are a very advanced programmers, so like, good luck, everybody, or they're just like beginners. They're like, okay, like I'm trying to figure out, my client needs this. I want to provide it for them. I'm a good marketing, liaison for all these things, but how do I get them into this scope of it? And yeah, I believe that we'll find this increasingly more in the future. This was my first time writing it. I think we can improve how to do this. And it exists in every language. Like Express.js is a beautiful language. Vue and Express.js together, those are beautiful languages. Those are the same structure of language that Svelte is. And for me, when I see those languages being written, I'm just like, oh, what a nice, how nice to program in this. So, if you're going to be coding, those are the ones to code in.
Awesome.